You did good. You're fast. You know how to do this really quick. Good afternoon. We are live on YouTube. And hi, Mike.
Hi.
We are live on YouTube, and I'm ready whenever you guys are ready.
Okay, I think the
was a bit
notice
nervous.
time was
Was a while.
1:45, so
So yeah, I started early just to make sure everything goes smooth.
no worries.
I will make you a co-host just for during the meeting if there's anyone who joins and you need to promote.
Perfect. All right, it is 1:45, so I will go ahead and call this meeting to order. I am filling in for Councilman Hess today, chairing Land Use and Planning. So thanks everybody for joining us. To start, I guess we'll put up the screen to share how the public can participate in these meetings. We're obviously still in a virtual setting. So I would ask the staff to share that screen. And while they're doing that, you can also call in or email council with any public comments. The numbers are posted right on the screen in front of us. And you can also always email council for general comment as well. With that, we will jump into roll call.
Stacy Anderson,
She's absent this week.
Myrtle Becerra,
Present.
Daniel Carlino,
Present.
John Contos,
Here.
Jordan Hess is absent. Gwen Jones,
Present.
Kristen Jordan,
Present.
Mike Nugent,
Present.
Jennifer Savage,
Present.
Amber Sherrill,
Present.
Sandra Baseca,
Present.
Heidi West is absent. And we have a quorum.
All right, thank you so much. Attached to the agenda are minutes from our June 8th, 2022 meeting. Unless anybody has any corrections, those will stand as approved. Seeing nobody, those are approved. All right, I would open the meeting with public comment for items not on the agenda. So if someone has a public comment for items not on the agenda, go ahead and put your hand up. And seeing nobody, we will move on. We have 3 items today on our agenda. Item 3.1 is an appointment to the Historic Preservation Commission. This is a recommendation supported by Councilman Hess and others to promote a current alternate to the Historic Preservation Committee, Jackson Hill, to fill the vacated voting seat of a previous member. And if we were to approve this, then the city clerk's office would advertise for a new alternate. Is there any staff that needs to fill in any blanks that I might have missed? That seems pretty straightforward. Ms. Jones.
How many times will I start talking before I unmute myself? I should just keep a running log there. I'm happy to make the motion.
Thank you. Any other questions or comment from council or from the committee? All right, any public comment from folks attending in the audience? All right, seeing no hands raised, we will move to a roll call vote.
Stacy Anderson is absent, sorry. Myrtle Becerra,
Yes.
Daniel Carlino,
Yes.
John Contos,
Yes.
Gwen Jones,
Yes.
Kristen Jordan,
Yes.
Mike Nugent,
Yes.
Jennifer Savage,
Yes.
Amber Sherrill,
Yes.
Sandra Paseka.
Yes.
The motion passes all yes.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to item 3.2, which is a public forum on the Missoula County Fairgrounds signs. I would ask Zoe Walters to please introduce this for us.
Hi, Cassie Trapard, Planning Supervisor. Zoe is actually in the attendees list and needs to be promoted. Or did she just get
She's already been,
promoted?
I promoted her.
Great, thank you.
Great. Hi, I'm Zoe Walters. I'm an assistant planner in community planning, development, and innovation. And today's presentation is an informational item for public forum. So community planning, development, and innovation has received notice from A&E Design on behalf of Missoula County Fairgrounds of their intent to replace an existing sign with heritage signs at the Missoula County Fairgrounds located at 1075 South Avenue West. The proposed project includes the removal of the existing overhead entrance sign at Fairway Drive and South Avenue, and the addition of 2 eternally illuminated ground signs arching over Fairway Drive, vehicle and pedestrian fairgrounds entrances. Missoula County is a local government agency, and City Council is authorized to hold a public hearing when an agency proposes to develop or use public land contrary to Title 20 zoning regulations. The public hearing is known as a public forum. Public forums used to be held at Board of Adjustment, but are now held at City Council due to a recent state law change. The public forum will be held on June 27th, and this presentation today is informational. The Missoula County Fairgrounds are located at 1075 South Avenue West, east of Russell Street. The green star marks the location of the proposed signs. The fairgrounds are zoned OP3, Public Lands Institutional. Parcels located to the south and east of the fairgrounds are also zoned OP3. And the parcels to the north and west of the subject property are zoned C14 Neighborhood Commercial. The fairgrounds land use designation is public and quasi-public. The designation for land with structures or uses such as schools, airport, community buildings, cemeteries, and utility facilities. The land so currently is owned by public agencies or held in reserve for future development, or public facilities also receive this designation. Surrounding land use designations include regional commercial and services, community and neighborhood mixed use, and public and quasi-public. There's a concentration of office, retail, motor vehicle repair, parks and recreation, schools, restaurant, financial services, and religious assembly uses surrounding the fairgrounds location. The surrounding uses are compatible with the land use designation outlined in the growth policy. Title 20, Section 2085-95 states government agencies may propose to use public land contrary to local zoning regulations. Whenever an agency proposes to use public land contrary to local zoning regulations, a public hearing must be held to allow for comment on the proposed use, and the agency shall attend the public hearing. City Council does not have the power to deny or condition the request. This means there will not be a vote on the item. The county may move forward with the sign proposal following the public forum. However, the county fairgrounds may consider comment. Title 20 defines agency as a board, bureau, commission, department, an authority, or other entity of state or local government. Missoula County is considered a local government agency and is permitted to vary from zoning through the public forum process. Missoula County is varying from Title 20, Section 2075-100 B4A, special signs, review by the Design Review Board for approval of a heritage sign. The section states, new heritage signs may only be approved when the Design Review Board finds that the granting of approval would result in superior design for the overall site, is in conformance with the overall purpose and intent of this chapter, and reflects a historically accurate sign that was previously on site. Missoula County is considered a governmental agency and as such is exempt from local zoning regulations, allowing them to vary from the requirement to get approval from Design Review Board for installation of heritage signs. Title 20 defines a heritage sign as one that employs distinctive graphics, symbols, and lighting that is a unique design to the community and are historically accurate, reflecting the heritage of Missoula. Heritage signs may be in the form of non-conforming signs or new signs that do not fit within the typical definition and measurements of wall, ground, or other sign. In other words, heritage signs are their own sign type. The county has followed the intent of the code by requesting review and approval of the heritage signs by the Historic Preservation Officer. The applicant submitted photographic documents of the past sign, design of the new sign showing the historically accurate relationship to the past sign, and proof of consultation with the Historic Preservation Officer, Elizabeth Johnson, as normally required by Title 20. The proposed signs were reviewed by the Historic Preservation Officer on March 18th, 2022, and were found to comply with the Title 20 heritage sign definition in section 2110. This is an image of the historic sign, earlier entrance at Fairway Drive entrance and just off of South Avenue. Key features include the archway, font, and posts on either side of the sign. This is an image of the existing entrance sign. And this is the new proposed signs. The proposed signs include one large arch sign to be placed overhead of the Fairway Drive vehicle entrance and one small arch sign to be placed overhead of the Fairway Drive pedestrian entrance. The large arch sign or vehicle entrance sign will be 46 square feet in area and 25 feet in height. The small arch sign or pedestrian entrance sign will be 11 square feet in area and 17 feet in height. Both signs will be internally illuminated with a white background and black bold font. The proposed design of the new signs will reflect the heritage of the Missoula County Fairgrounds using distinctive design and lighting, a historically accurate arch and text font. And staff does not have a recommended motion as no action is required. And city staff and Missoula County are here for questions.
All right, thank you very much. This is an informational item, so I will ask if there's any public comment from anybody in the audience. Seeing none, are there any questions or comments from council? And if you could take your screen share down, that'd be great. Thanks. Ms. Jones.
I just wanted to, first of all, say thanks, Zoe, for a great presentation, and I really appreciated it and love the graphics, and I'm excited. I understand they have to go through this process since this is for various reasons for these types of signs, but I think our fairgrounds is looking great these days and they continue to improve it. So I'm all for it. Not that we're making a motion, but I'm just providing my support.
Sounds good. Anybody else, questions or comments? All right, seeing none. Sorry, my phone's ringing in the background. We will move on from this agenda item. Thank you very much for your time on this one. We really appreciate it. And we will move on to item 3.3, which is the potential development agreement in regards to Expo Parkway. And I am going to introduce this just by reiterating that these agreements are generally found later in the process, closer to the building permit process. But because the owner has presented it as part of the conversation, staff feels there's benefit to the public in discussing it now. It is not tied to the rezoning request, and we cannot tie conditions in this agreement to that. And with that, I'm going to ask Dave to kind of reintroduce this and bring us up to speed.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Dave DeGrandpre with City of Missoula Development Services. And just a quick background on the development agreement. A development agreement was submitted in conjunction with the application to rezone the property at 2900, 2920, and 2990 Expo Parkway, also known as Grant Creek Village, to RM1-45. The development agreement is a contract between the city of Missoula and the developer. It stipulates certain types of development that would be built on the property, timing of things like amenities like a dog park, like a swimming pool, like playground area, and things like that. It's an enforceable agreement. I know Ryan Sudbury is here to talk about some of the specific legalities and elements along those lines. Staff has worked with the developer to, I guess I'll say, shore up the contract, provide some clarifying language, legal language. Ryan, I think, has been doing most of that on the city's behalf. We haven't looked at the contents, in other words, the amenities or timing so much, but have put this on the table for council's review. So to next steps, Monday night, council is scheduled to make a decision to have final consideration on the rezoning request. And the rezoning request, because of the number of protests and percentage of protests that have come in, 2/3 majority would be required to approve the zoning. So that would happen first, whether the council will take a vote on whether to approve the rezoning. If the zoning is approved, then council could also take a vote or adopt a motion on authorizing the mayor to sign the development agreement. Council, which could be done by simple majority, not 2/3. Council has some other options as well. You can decide that you'd like to continue this discussion, perhaps negotiate with the developer. Again, if the zoning is approved on some of the contents of the development agreement, you could choose to not approve the development agreement or authorize the mayor to sign it or other. So you have some options on the table. Again, to reiterate, we can't base approval of the zoning on the development agreement. Zoning must be approved based on adherence to the rezoning criteria that are outlined or described in the staff report. But this is another element to consider when you're thinking about future development of the property.
Right. Thank you very much, Dave. Mr. Nugent, you have your hand up.
Just one minor clarification. The zoning approval is 2/3 of those present and voting. So if people pass, they don't get counted at all. And originally, the state law used to say 3/4 of the entire council. Applicants were complaining that people wouldn't show up or wouldn't vote, which made it impossible sometimes to get their 3/4 vote. So the Montana State Legislature was asked to amend the law, and now the current law is 2/3 of those present and voting.
All right, thank you. I see a couple council members have their hands up. Real quick before we move to council questions, Dave or Ryan, any additional information for us on this?
Well, I would just add that the Parks and Rec Department has recently come up with some potential suggestions on amending the development agreement that you have, which is dated June 1st of this year. And I think Nathan McLeod is here to speak to that as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that now if that is the right time.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so let me share my screen because I'm very visual, so I think it's easier for me at least to see things, and so I'm sure some of you are the same. So in the development agreement, we have section 2 is kind of related to parkland and parkland dedication and what the developer is proposing to provide for their residents. So some of the clarifications that we would like to include in this development agreement are highlighted here in yellow. The first couple are based around if the city is going to be suggesting that the developer provide certain amenities. I feel that it's important that we also make sure that they are in compliance with adopted regulations, rules for safety of the residents. And so the number one is just saying that the pool will be constructed and maintained in compliance with DPHHS standards. Number 2, the playground will meet CPSC safety guidelines and ASTM standards. And number 3, a fenced dog park that meets the minimum guidelines for a dog park provided by the American Kennel Club, including appropriate size based on anticipated use, and that the additional dog waste stations will be maintained by the developer. We have run into situations in the past where private developers or developments have called and complained that the city is not maintaining their dog waste stations. So we want to make sure that that's clear in this. The next item is the next 2 items are related to providing public access on their dedicated parkland or their areas of common land. And something that we've gone back and forth with the developer a little bit on. And so item number 4 is looking at some of the hiking trails that they are proposing on the hillside to the west of their development. We would love for them to be able to provide public access to this as a benefit to the public. They have agreed to provide this in the form of a public license agreement. And so this language is really looking at how this license agreement would be, that the city and the developer would work together to work out any kind of issues if there are inappropriate behaviors from the public happening on this property, and that we would work together to find solutions before this license agreement is revoked by either party. Number 5 is looking at a public access easement, which is different than a license agreement. This would be a permanent public access easement on the eastern edge of their property. And this would be 10 feet wide to allow for us to develop an 8 to 10 foot wide asphalt trail that the city would seek connections to the Grant Creek Trail that currently runs north-south, that is in pretty poor condition right now. This provides us an opportunity to potentially reroute this trail in the future to provide that connection for the public and for the residents of this development. Again, the language in here talks about how the Parks and Recreation Department will work with the developer to ensure that inappropriate behavior is taken care of. And because it is a public access easement, we will be able to apply our regulations and our ordinances with police, with animal control, and Parks and Recreation enforcement. Skipping ahead, once we get down to number 8 and 9, this is really looking at, we just wanted to clarify. We felt that this was important to clarify that this development will still meet multifamily activity area requirements as defined in the municipal code, chapter 20, and that all streets, parking lots, and common areas will include trees per City of Missoula Public Works standards, zoning codes, and the Parks and Recreation Design Manual. And finally, in section 3, this section talks about obligations of the city to seek trail connections. None of this is really that far above and beyond what we're already actively doing in seeking future trail connections and parkland for the city. But we wanted to remove that the Prospect open space that was listed in this as a potential trail connection. That neighborhood has already expressed the fact that they do not want public access in their private property, and we are respecting that. And so we'd like to remove it from this development agreement. That is all the changes that I had.
Thank you, Nathan. Have the park department suggested changes been discussed with the owner?
Yes, I had a meeting with them earlier, it was last week, I think, and their response was positive, and they seemed amenable to most of these, if not all of them, with perhaps some minor language changes that I think we would want to just work out with them, probably with our legal teams.
Okay, I see that Alan McCormick from their team has raised his hand, so I'm going to promote him to panelist quickly and let him speak to this as well. And I will get to council question and comment, but I want to get through this first.
Thanks, Mike. I think you were referring to me, but as you promoted me to panelist, it rebooted, so I missed.
Oh, yes, I was referring to you, so.
Thanks, Alan McCormick, Garlington Lana Robinson, representing Ken Alt for this project. We had a very positive discussion with Nathan. Nathan sent us some suggested changes. We've made some comments back on those. The version that was on the screen that Nathan was showing, I've not seen. It looked like there were some additional changes that were made since then. I couldn't quite keep up as they were scrolling by. There were some potentially material changes to section, I think it was 4. But I'd want to take a look at that. But in my quick scan, I thought there was language there that was workable. There were a couple of things in here that we said we don't mind. I mean, the last 2 items dealing with the multifamily activity area and streets and parking lots and the like that have to meet codes, that has to happen anyway. And so our recommendation is not to put things in this agreement that are automatically going to happen because you're then creating potential interpretation questions. But nevertheless, if the council feels more comfortable leaving those in, that's fine with us because they are the law. Similarly with the pool provision about it being maintained and constructed in compliance with DPHHS standards, that's the law. So it's fine if you want to leave that in there. The central playground meeting CSPC safety guidelines, I think that's the law. And in any event, it's a good practice, so that's not a problem. The fenced dog park meeting minimum guidelines for the AKC, my comment that I made back to Ryan Sudbury was the city's kind of creating a standard there that now it's going to be arguably have to enforce. So while it doesn't bother us, you might want to consider whether that's a standard you want to have in there to enforce as a contractual obligation. So I do want to take a look at that section 4 language because I haven't seen it. And then that section 5 language about doing this 10-foot wide public access easement, that's something that Ryan suggested and Ken has agreed to take a look at. I think we want to just double check that language, but it seemed like a really good idea to try to get a public trail along that eastern edge. And this seems like a real good way to create a partnership between the city and the developer to get that done.
All right, thank you very much, Alan. I'm sure there will be questions for you, so I'm going to leave you on as a panelist. Nathan or Dave, anything else from you? And I guess Dave, is the suggested amendments from Parks that Nathan just went over part of the agenda packet right now?
I believe so. I can double check though.
Okay, thanks. All right, if there's nothing else, I'm going to go to counselor questions and Ms. Jordan.
Thank you. I think I have a rookie newbie question. I just have significant concerns that we're talking about a development agreement before we voted on the rezone, and how do we make sure that we're not setting a precedent? I mean, the development agreement's awesome. It's a really cool thing. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that or not, actually, as I say that. But I also wonder, I just don't understand the fine line between talking about a development agreement that's not binding before we do a rezone vote. And I would love some more information, and I'm glad that Mr. Nugent Sr. is on the call. I need some clarification to understand if we're setting a precedent, if we're in a murky area, because this makes me feel really uncomfortable, I'll just be really honest. Thank you.
Dave, do you want to start with that? And then if we need Jim or Ryan to chime in, we will.
Sure. Thank you. So the purpose of this meeting today, I think, is to wipe away some of that murk, so to speak. And so, first and foremost is the rezoning. That's not actually the subject of today's meeting, but that needs to be considered by council first, and it needs to be considered independently of the development agreement. In other words, does the rezoning in your mind meet the rezoning criteria as described in the staff report that's from Title 20 and also state law? So that's number one. And if council votes to approve the rezoning, then it's appropriate to consider the development agreement, but that would have to come second. And it's important to not base the decision on whether or not to approve the rezoning on the development agreement. If the rezoning does not pass, then the development agreement is moot at that point. So there would be no, I'm not sure procedurally what the step would be, but essentially no vote should be taken if that's the case. Development agreements, the city has entered into other development agreements. I haven't been a party to those. I'm a fairly recent hire with the city, so I haven't been a party to those, but I know that there are some in effect that have come about under land use decisions before. And so I think Jim or Ryan could speak to those probably better than I.
Mr. Nugent, you are unmuted, so do you have something to add?
I think that there's always a dilemma as to whether people think that there's some sort of precedent being set, no matter what the facts are. You just have to look at each one on a case-by-case basis. And you usually can distinguish between the ones you're trying to draw a comparison with. There's usually adequate facts that will allow you to distinguish between the two. I think what you have to realize is you need some flexibility to try and work to address issues that you have pending. And this is one solution that's available to consider. As Dave indicated, the zoning has to be decided first. And if the zoning doesn't pass, the other becomes moot. There's no need to vote because the rezoning did not occur. So I can understand why people have concerns. I don't think it's any legal barrier.
Okay, thank you.
May I have a follow-up?
Well, I was going to see Mr. Sudbury had his microphone unmuted too, so I wanted to see if you had anything to add, and then I'll let you follow up, Kristen.
Thank
No,
you.
I don't think so. I just want to reiterate the one element that I think Dave brought up is that these are traditionally brought up closer to or contemporaneous with building permit review and approval. And, to the extent that, we find that this process has caused too much confusion in this case, we could just in the future decline to consider these during a rezone proceeding and say that's just not the appropriate time frame, and we could put up some sort of sideboards in a development review process to say, we consider these during the building permit review proceeding. These are unconnected. So I agree with Jim. I think we can distinguish this in the future if we decide this isn't something we want to do.
Great. Kristen, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you. That was actually my question. So it was good that you spoke. I mean, I would prefer to not have the situation arise again where we're considering a development agreement and a rezone at the same time. It makes me feel uncomfortable. And so perhaps that's another conversation we can have at a different time. So thank you for that additional information, Mr. Sudbury and Mr. Nugent Sr.
All right. Mr. Carlino.
Thanks. Yeah, I just have two questions. One, I saw that this development agreement says, let me see what it said. No more than 700 dwelling units. And I was just curious if you could tell us what the growth policy calls for in this parcel.
Sure. The growth policy on the vast majority of the parcel calls for high density residential development greater than 24 dwelling units per acre.
And do you know what the total is?
Total gross units that could be developed on the property if the zoning is changed to RM1-45, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000.
Okay. So is it safe to say that we couldn't have this development agreement as is and comply with the growth policy?
No, I don't think that's accurate.
So the development agreement does comply with the growth policy, you're saying?
I think if the zoning is changed and the development agreement is brought into effect, I do not see a conflict between the number of dwelling units that would be permitted on the property and what the growth policy calls for.
Okay, thanks. And then I was curious as well, if there's anything in this development agreement that specifically protects like the mountain hillside slopes. I know that there's the drawing of it all. So in that drawing, it looks like they don't build on the hillsides, but I was wondering if that was part of the agreement as well.
Well, I guess there is a tie in that the development agreement states that development on the property must occur in substantial compliance with the site plan that you're referencing. And the site plan shows future development locations not on the hillside. It kind of calls that hillside out specifically as open space.
Thank you.
Ms. Becerra.
Thank you. I have several questions. I guess the first one is, while I appreciate Park's amendment of the development agreement, as Mr. McCormick mentioned, a lot of these are already part of standards and regulations that need to that developments have to comply with, such as the pool or some of those facilities that are regulated by federal or health regulations. So, I just don't see what the public benefit of having those added conditions to this development agreement would do for the public benefit. And maybe my question is the pool private or public? Is the central playground public or private? Is the dog park private or public? And if it's all private, is it within the realm of the legal realm of the city to impose conditions on private property? I guess that's one of my questions. And I would like to learn a little bit more about that. I mean, do we do that regularly where we can put conditions like that on private property on things that are not for the public benefit?
Mr. Sudbury, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say we do that sometimes. It's, not all we do is protecting the public, the general public, who may or may not have access rights to this property, but also the tenants that are going to live there. So there's a number of standards that we have for building, and the building code generally provides standards for the protection of people. So I would say that, yes, we do that. I would also say that, this is sort of a negotiated agreement about a development that's occurring in the city. So there's additional leeway beyond what is written into the building code or the city's design standards in a situation where we're, having an arm's length negotiation about some development. If they feel like they're getting something from the city and we feel like we're getting something from them, they can commit to some additional conditions that we may not otherwise have written into our code. So I would say that I think those are fine here. Speaking to the questions at issue, I think I tend to agree with you on some of the elements. Sometimes there are commitments that are made, for example, to install playground or park equipment or something like that, more generally. And there may be a sense from the people that have negotiated that agreement what was intended by that, or there may not be. So having some additional referenced standards, for example, with the dog park, gives us sort of a third-party reference to look at if there is a disagreement down the line as to what we thought we were agreeing to. And so I think that I don't want to put words in Nathan's mouth, so he can speak up if he's got different thoughts on it. But I think that's the idea, is to reference a sort of impartial third-party standards that we can look at down the line when they're going to construct it, if we think there was they're not doing what we intended, or if they down the line think that we're asking for something that that they didn't think they were agreeing to.
Mr. Nugent, you put your hand up. Do you want to speak to this or something else?
Yeah, it's important to make sure that the private property owner agrees or is voluntarily allowing this to happen. We were in litigation out in Clark Fork Terrace, in which Alan McCormick was on the other side. And there was concern about whether a soccer field was available for the public or just the private. And the city engineer wanted it to be public. It was under the power lines. And yet they sued about it. And that's one of the issues they prevailed on, was that they never offered for that soccer field to be available to the public. It was intended for the private use of the private subdivision. So it's really important, if there's any conflict or question, to make sure that the landowner is agreeing on the record to allow the public to use it.
All right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Follow up?
Yeah, I have several questions, but one
Go
that
ahead.
relates to this specific one is, it seems to me that all of these conditions, if you will, are part of our building code. So regardless of this agreement, this is something the developer would have to comply with. So while I appreciate the negotiation that must have happened to arrive at this conclusion, it almost seems like we're adding things to make the agreement more balanced in terms of public benefit, but yet I don't see any additional benefit other than what's already required of the developer to do, regardless of an agreement or not. So it makes it look like we're adding more conditions to get more for the public benefit, and also and in the public benefit, I'm including the residents of the specific development. But it seems to me like this is already a given. This is something that already has to happen through our code compliance. But, I understand that these are negotiations. It's part of the negotiations that must have happened. I just, while I appreciate it, I'm not impressed that they're there, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. My next question, if I may, has to do with the bus shelter location. Was this a coordinated effort between the developer and public schools or Hellgate? Because while I think it's a great idea, and I think it would be much appreciated by the parents and the kids that usually wait for the bus at the corner, I would like to make sure that it serves the intended purpose, that it's not a shelter that's going to be in front of the site. And yet the bus, I'm not sure the bus goes all the way into where this development is. So I think it would be good to make sure that it is coordinated with the school bus system. Another question that I have is the hillside that Daniel mentioned. While on the preliminary plat or the plan, the site plan that we have, we're not seeing any proposed development. Has that area been designated a no build zone for the future? Is that possible? Is that understood? Or would it be possible to include that in the development agreement, that hillsides of a certain slope are considered no build zone?
Dave, can you speak to either of those two questions?
Sure. So actually, the first one I don't know the answer to. I think, and that was about the bus stop location that's called out. I'll just share my screen here quickly so that people can see it. And I was not a party to those discussions. I think and so that would be along Expo Parkway. If you can see my cursor, lower left-hand corner where number 7 is, that would be that's proposed to be a covered bus stop location. I was not a party to those discussions. Voith Engineering could answer that question, but along the northern, maybe I'll shrink this down a little bit. The western portion of the property, the hatched area, this is the steeper hillside toward the top of the drawing. You can see so it would be above all of the units, and it shows hiking trails, and it's hatched, and there's a number 6. If you go down to the key, it says number 6, protected hillside and hiking trails, no build zone.
Great.
So it's called out as a no build zone. Again, I'll just point back the tie to the agreement itself, which says that development of the property shall be in substantial compliance with this site plan, and that's what this site plan calls.
Great. Mr. Chair, I have 2 more questions, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
The next one, does the development have covenants? And if so, I would like to know if it's possible for the development agreement to include that at such time when an evacuation plan is developed for Missoula and for this drainage, that it be included as part of the covenants.
There are no covenants on the property, to the best of my knowledge. And I think the developer might be able to answer your question better, but because I think the property would be run through some sort of a business enterprise set up to run the development, the rentals, and to manage the facilities and things like that.
So just quick follow-up, do we not have any living with wildlife or any of the guidelines that we normally apply to any development and the wildlife interface applying to this development?
No, because this is not a subdivision or an annexation, it's a rezoning. So and rezonings aren't conditioned. So we don't have, typically like through a subdivision process, you might have living with wildlife type standards, or there might be covenants applied and things like that. But because this is a rezoning, it's kind of a different animal. Conditions cannot be applied.
Right, but the ultimate result is that you have people who do live with wildlife, regardless of what the process was for getting the development there. So I'm curious to know if this would be something that can be included as part of the development agreement. Most developments in the Grand Creek area have living with wildlife guidelines. And if at all possible, I would like to see that happen here as well. We are working on Bear Smart communities, and it's important that this also comply with that at such time when we develop it. So I would really like to see a way for us to include living with wildlife and potential new guidelines that will be developed to address living with bears and an evacuation or emergency exit plan if possible. And Mr. Chair, I just have one more question. And Ryan, you mentioned that, excuse me, the one alternative to having discussions about a development agreement so close to a potential rezone would be to have these conversations or to have a development agreement drafted during the building permit process. But that would that allow for public process? I mean, that would be an internal staff and developer agreement, but it wouldn't be brought to for city council or for public review, or would it? I guess that's a question.
Mr. Chair, those are all, so any contract entered into by the city of Missoula is required to be approved by city council. So all our development agreements that we do go to city council. They're not typically negotiated in front of city council, but we bring them forward through the LUP process usually, and city council can make recommendations and ask staff to incorporate additional elements, and then we can go back to the development team and see if they'd be willing to do that. So these do come to city council, and you have approval of these when they come up, in the normal course of business.
Great. Thank you. That's all my questions, but I would like to hear at some point about having this development adhere to some of those guidelines that we have in place for living with in areas like the wildlife urban interface, please.
Dave, could you speak to that as far as how that's handled in the building permit process, or for any generic parcel that doesn't have to go through anything beyond building permit?
I don't think that it is. I think it's left up to the private landowner. But this is maybe a different situation where I think the developer actually could speak to those elements and whether he would be interested in including living with wildlife type guidelines, and also adherence to an evacuation plan that might be developed at some point in the future. So that should probably be in the developer's court.
Is there anybody from the development group that would like to speak to the question? We promote Mr. Alt here. And while I'm promoting Mr. Alt, Mr. McCormick, you can certainly begin.
I appreciate that. Certainly the living with wildlife language is something that is commonly incorporated into subdivisions. I'm generally familiar with the language, but the language does change from some time to time. So if the city could provide us with a copy of that language, we can take a look at it to see if it works. This is an apartment complex. Mr. Alt is going to manage the entire complex through a management company. And so it is different than your standard subdivision, and the amenities are certainly something that's built as part of the property or the project as a whole and managed as a whole. So it is very different in that it doesn't have covenants and the like. And if I could go on a tangent just for a second, Ms. Jordan made a comment that this is a non-binding agreement. That's been reported in the news as well, and that's not correct. It's a binding contract. It has the legal effect of a contractual agreement between two parties. And so I wanted to make sure that we clarify that. And Ms. Becerra was talking about the history and what are you getting from a public benefit? I'll go back to a question I answered that Mr. Carlino brought up at one of the initial hearings, which is a code issue. What we're trying to do here is work with a code that no longer works for how property develops. A lot of these things could be handled through a PUD process, but your code does not allow this project to utilize the PUD for reasons that don't make a lot of sense. but nevertheless, we can't use it. And so we were trying to find a way, and the development agreement was the way that people could have assurance that what Mr. Alt was proposing to build would actually get built. And primarily what the public is getting out of this is an enforceable agreement to reduce density, cap it at 700 rather than capping it at potentially 1,000 or 1,100. And then, we've worked in good cooperation with the Parks Department about figuring out how, despite it being a private apartment complex, how can you nevertheless provide some public trail connectivity and work together with that? Some of the amenities that got built in just kind of got built in because, again, it was like, well, you say you're going to put in a pool, you say you're going to put in a bus shelter, you say you're going to do these things. Why don't we put it in the agreement so that it becomes an enforceable item? But certainly a number of those items, particularly the ones the Parks Department is looking to add, are items that do just reflect current code.
All right, thank you. Mr. Alt, I saw you put your hand down, so if you did want to speak to that, you can put your hand back up. But in the meantime, Ms. Jones.
Thanks. If I just wait till everybody else talks, they cover a lot of stuff and I don't have to talk as much. So thanks, everybody. Great questions. A couple of thoughts, and then I did have just a couple of small specific questions. And what Mr. McCormick was saying, it does touch on the fact that we're doing a big code reform project. And so we're kind of in this gray area right now. And some of the stuff I feel like in this development agreement looks like it's already in our law. Some of it's different, but it's just providing clarity is the way I see it. And I am hoping with our code reform project that ultimately we have better tools in the long run. So just wanted to note that. And I also would echo what Ms. Becerra said regarding wildlife. We are having a lot of bear issues currently, and I've been sitting through a lot of bear meetings. And since this is a new project, there's the opportunity to get it right. So I do hope, to me, that's just common sense. I hope that there's some bear aware practices, our best bear smart practices that can be incorporated into this project so that it's not a problem in the long run, but it's a solution in the long run. So just wanted to put that out there. Couple of specific questions then regarding some of the amendments that Nathan had discussed regarding the trees. I can't dredge up our tree framework well enough in my mind. Could you clarify, Nathan, when they're supposed to install or plant trees compliant with our city ordinances, is that, I know that goes to the type of tree, does it also go to density? In other words, how many trees per area?
Yes, so when we look at like our complete street standards, street design, we would be looking at trees typically at a 30-foot on center spacing.
Okay, and so with this project, this is a private development, the streets within it are not public, I believe. Is this extra then that they're agreeing to, or is this what they would already be obliged to do legally?
It's a good question. I think on any public street, they would have to do it per code. Whether the internal private streets, they do not have to, my understanding is they're not required to do the same level of tree service. So this would be above and beyond that.
Okay, follow up, Mike. Thanks. I think it's a good practice and frankly creates a much better living environment and keeps everything cooler. There's just all sorts of good reasons to do it, as well as stormwater retention. So I hope that is part of this. And to clarify, the way it's written, does it apply to all of the internal areas where there's parking in streets also, or what exactly does this mean?
I think I can address that. So we have, in Title 20, we have parking lot landscaping requirements. And so I think the development agreement, I don't believe actually calls out particular, trees. I don't think it references trees unless I missed it. But certainly our Title 20 landscaping requirements and multi-unit landscaping requirements and things like that do.
Okay, I've just got a couple more, Mike.
Well, real quick, Nathan, did you want to add to that? You unmuted yourself.
The development agreement does have number 9 states that all streets, parking lots, and common areas will include trees per the City of Missoula Public Works standards, zoning codes, and the Parks and Recreation Design Manual.
Okay. Thanks. I think that answers my question, actually. So that's helpful. Last question was just with paragraph 5. I think it's regarding trails or the easement access pathway. I forget what it is. Sentence 3 doesn't seem to have a verb. I think I understand what you guys are getting towards there, but it just, as you were kind of going through it, and I looked at it earlier, but anyway, I think you guys are, going to go over it with a fine tooth comb, but just needed a little cleaning up. That's all. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Mr. Carlino.
Yeah, I had a question and then a motion, if that's in order.
Go ahead.
So my question is I'm guessing the answer is no, but is there opportunity for deed restricted affordable units to be added to the development agreement?
That would have to be voluntarily agreed to by the developer. Montana legislature passed a law in the last session that prohibited local governments from requiring affordable housing as a condition of approval.
Okay. And then I move to amend the development agreement to delete section 2A.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor for clarity. Dave, can you pull up the development agreement so we can show the committee what the motion to delete 2A is?
Yes, although I don't believe that this was advertised for, well, I guess I'm not quite clear on city council procedures. So maybe we'll get some legal comment on motions and amendments and things like that, but I'll blow it up and share my screen.
There we go.
So section 2A states no more than 700 dwelling units on the subject property, and then defines what a dwelling unit is. So that if that motion were to be passed, that would eliminate the cap on dwelling units.
All right, thank you. You can take your screen down. I have a procedure question. We don't have a motion on the floor in regards to the development agreement whatsoever. So is it proper for us to have a motion to amend something that we don't actually have on the floor?
During your deliberations, you can make motions to amend whatever's pending on the floor, and that includes you can amend the development agreement. You can amend the motion that's pending. You have to have flexibility to be able to address the evolving concerns of the governing body membership, which is the city council.
Okay, so we can amend and then at the end, make a motion based on what we've talked about.
What you would do at this point in time is, unless, excuse me, Daniel withdraws his amendment, you'll have to first vote on his amendment if he continues his amendment before you can go back to the main motion.
Perfect, that's what I thought. Ms. Becerra, is your hand up to talk on this amendment?
Yes, I think it's important to also get public comment.
Yep, so I will do public comment on the proposed amendment to remove section 2A. So if anybody is in the audience and wants to make public comment, you can raise your hand. All right. Going to promote Ms. Burke to a panelist. Kim Burke, you should be able to unmute yourself and make
Can
comment.
you hear me?
Yes. Now you've muted yourself. Can you,
Go ahead.
My
Well-
speaker quit working. Can you hear me?
yes,
Nod your head if you can hear me, because I can't hear you. Okay. I understand where Daniel Carlino is coming from. He'd like to see more than 700 units allowed here. And from my point of view, this whole process has been working to limiting the number of units there. And it would make the whole DA a moot point, and we would just be looking at the rezone to RM 145. And all of the other things could be included in the building permit process. And so I think his motion is simply a move to get more houses, more units on that property. And I would encourage you to vote no on the motion.
all right, thank you. Any further public comment? All right, seeing none, we will go to committee member comment and Ms. Jordan.
There's a couple public too.
Yeah,
so-
thank you. I just
Oh,
saw
no,
a
they
couple
just
of
jumped
hands
up.
go up.
Okay, I'm gonna promote Cameron. And then Grant Parker will be second. Or I guess Grant Parker, why don't you go ahead because you got promoted first.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
So to clarify, am I commenting on the development agreement or Mr. Aquino's motion?
Just the motion to amend. So just the removal of 2A.
Okay, I believe that the main purpose behind the development agreement was to respond to the city council's concerns in their earlier rezoning consideration, which the city council denied it, that the proposed development was too dense, and would urge you not to go backwards on that that prior decision that the city council has already considered and made.
All right, thank you. Cameron, I'm trying to promote you to panelist. I think you have to say yes. All right, there it goes. Go ahead and unmute yourself and state your name for the record.
Cameron Shortell. Yeah, to second the last public comment, that's kind of how I understood it as well, was not so much that we were going forward today with changing anything to allowable units, but more focusing on the proposal. So there's a little bit of, as stated earlier in the meeting, I feel like that just adds a little murkiness more than us going forward with focusing on the proposal side of this than the actual zoning, rezoning, dwelling units amount. I just feel like we're going in the ditch a little bit and off the road. That's all I got.
All right, thank you for your comments. Anybody else from the public? I see no more hands. So now, Ms. Jordan.
Thank you. I think I have a bit of a procedural question because I'd actually like to make a motion that we table this until next week so that we can actually vote on the rezone first and not vote on this before we vote on the rezone. And so I need some help understanding how to get through these motions.
So there's a motion on the floor already, so I believe we have to vote on the motion on the floor before we could accept another motion.
Yep. Okay.
The other thing is tabling something basically doesn't guarantee that it'll come up again. It puts it away. So we could choose not to take any action today and leave it on our committee business, is my understanding. And somebody with more experience could pop in and tell me if I'm correct or not, but that's my understanding.
Anybody help with that? I mean, I understand we have to do the motion first. After that, I'd like to have a discussion about not making a decision on this today. because I think it's odd to make a decision on something that we haven't even voted on the bigger picture for. And so I'd like to have that conversation.
Okay, why don't you, we'll readdress that after we finish this motion, okay? Right, Ms. Vasika.
Thanks. I will be in support of Daniel's motion today. With my past voting record, I've always been in support of private landowners being able to do what they would like on their own property. And then just because we take this part out doesn't mean that they can't still just stick with the 700 units. So I think this gives them more freedom. So I will be in support of this.
Thank you. Ms. West.
So I'm not going to support Daniel's amendment, mostly because I feel that this agreement was an attempt by the developer to provide some sort of predictability, not necessarily to us, but to the neighbors, and that this would remove all of that, for the neighbors, most importantly.
All right, Ms. Jones.
I would just echo what Ms. West said. I think this does provide predictability, and at the midnight hour to then completely turn it upside down sends a really bad signal to our community as to how we do business. And frankly, if we are, this is an agreement that a private developer is stepping up to agree to and to create a better project. And we should be working with that situation instead of against it. I understand that we need more housing, but this is still a very, very significant number of units that could potentially be built. And I think it's important to work with people instead of against people. And that's what I'm seeing this is. So I'm against the amendment.
Mr. Carlino.
Yeah, I guess just to the midnight hour point, I guess I'd just say that this development agreement was made in the 11th hour. We were supposed to vote on the rezone, and then this came in the 11th hour, a whole new agreement. So I feel like it's okay in the 12th hour to make changes to said agreement, and that, and I also support just tabling this until after the rezone as well, but I guess we'll talk about that next. But I'm definitely still in support of amending this so that the government is not limiting the number of units allowed besides what's limited in zoning.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Carlino. I don't disagree that now's our opportunity to discuss it. So putting forth a suggestion, I would agree with. I think that in this case, for me, both parties, both the owner and the city have kind of worked out this agreement. This was proposed by the developer. So I don't feel that it's a condition that was put on by us. It was something that was volunteered by the owner. Ms. Cheryl.
Yeah, thanks. And Daniel, I think it's okay to bring this forward. I'm not going to vote for it though, because I think I agree with the public commenters that the main point of this, while we're adding some other details that I think that are going to be, nice to have outlined. I think kind of the main point was the density number and some certainty around that. So I'm not going to vote for the amendment because I think it's taking out a big part of the agreement. But I think that's fine to make that suggestion. And for all the reasons people are outlining.
All right, thank you, Ms. Cheryl. Ms. Savage.
I just echo what Ms. Cheryl said. I'm not going to vote for the amendment either, though I do believe in density. I think the entire point of the development agreement, while adding other amenities, was actually to reach out as a good faith effort. That's my understanding to the community around this proposed rezone because of the number of units that were possible there. So that's all I have.
All right, any further questions or comments from the committee on the proposed amendment to delete item 2A from the development agreement in front of us? Right, seeing none, we've already taken public comment, so I would ask the staff to do a roll call vote on the motion to amend the agreement by removing item 2A.
So I wrote down the comments, or should I do a roll call?
Yeah, I think since there's a motion on the floor for Mr. Carlino, I believe we do need to do a roll call vote on it.
Will take a minute, sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
Martha Becerra,
No.
Daniel Carlino,
Yes.
John Contos,
No.
Gwen Jones,
No.
Kristen Jordan,
No.
Mike Nugent,
No.
Jennifer Savage,
No.
Amber Sherrill,
No.
Sandra Beseca,
Yes.
Heidi Best,
No.
there's 2 yes, 8 no's.
Okay, thank you very much. So the motion to amend does not pass. So we are back to discussing the development agreement as presented in item 3.3. Ms. Jordan.
Thank you. Yeah, I would like to bring up my motion to save the decision on this until after we vote on the rezone.
Okay, Mr. Nugent, I'm going to ask you to speak to the sequencing on that and what the committee's potential options are.
The vote's gonna be secondary because you have to vote on the rezoning, otherwise there's no point in considering the development agreement unless the rezoning passes. So even if you have them lined up like airplanes at an airport hovering around waiting their turn, the first vote that controls is going to be the rezoning. And if the rezoning doesn't pass, it becomes moot and there's no need to address it any further.
Ms. Jordan, does that answer your question, or do you? I'm not sure that it did.
Oh, I don't have a question. I think actually Mr. Nugent just kind of confirmed my motion even further. It doesn't make any sense to me to vote on this development agreement when we actually haven't even voted on the rezone. And so I would like to move that we postpone the vote on this development agreement until after we vote on the rezone. And that's my motion.
So to clarify, you are asking us to postpone the vote from this committee until after the council takes action.
Yes, thank you.
President Jones, I'm going to ask for your guidance here.
Sure. I was going to say, our vote today gets it out of committee and onto the council floor. I think Monday night, June 27th, is when we were hearing the rezone hearing. We would do the entire rezone hearing, get through that ultimate substantive vote, and then after that, we would address this. So that's, I think Mike uses the right word, it's the sequencing. This just, our vote today gets it out of committee and onto the council floor, and that's where the ultimate decision is made. So if we flipped that and we heard this first on Monday night, that would be putting the cart before the horse. But I think as long as we sequence it correctly, we're fine. And the city attorneys, please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the message I've been hearing from you.
So are you saying that this would not be on the consent agenda, but would be an agenda item?
I think we could do that. Well, if it would not be on the consent agenda, if we are not all voting in unanimously on it, it will be on committee reports. And I think just as a matter of importance, we would kick it to committee reports to follow the rezone hearing. Anyway, my 2 cents.
It would have to be on a committee report because you don't know what's going to happen on the rezoning vote. So because you're up in the air on that, you have to delay. I'm not sure if I understand Kirsten's motion. Is she saying delay it that night or keeping it in committee and bringing it out of committee later?
I think it needs, yeah, thank you. I think it needs to stay in committee until we vote on the rezone. I'm not asking it properly. I feel like it needs to sit here because we are setting a precedent, whether we like it or not. We're voting on a development agreement before we voted on a rezone. And I am getting some of my words mixed up and I apologize for that. I want this to stay in committee until after we vote on the rezone in city council.
And just for clarification purposes from anybody, there is no motion needed to keep something in committee. Is that correct?
If there's a division among the council as to whether to keep it in committee, you should vote on whether you're going to keep it in committee or not.
Okay. So Ms. Jordan, are you making a motion to request that we keep this in committee?
Yes, thank you very much. That's what I'd like to move to. Yeah.
Oh, no, it was for me, not you. I was just trying to get there.
No, thank you for that. Yes.
All right, we've got several hands up. I assume they all want to speak to this motion. However, our rules would say we need to call for public comment on a new motion, correct? Yep. There's a hand up in the audience. Mr. Parker, I'm going to promote you to panelist. Give it a second to kick in. And Mr. Parker, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Again, Grant Parker, I'm General Counsel with the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. I have a process question based on this discussion that we just had, and that is, I don't believe that the Land Use Planning Committee voted on the application for rezoning that was considered on May 3rd. I thought there was going to be further hearing on that. I don't believe there was. I could be wrong. And if that is the case, if it takes an action out of committee to get to the city council, why is it on the city council agenda for Monday? I'm not commenting on the pros and cons. I just have that question.
Mr. Parker, that public hearing was placed on the council agenda and opened in May, I believe. I don't remember the exact date. Ms. Jones, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It has not been put up for final consideration, so that public hearing is still open, but it was properly placed on the council's agenda. Ms. Jones, you want to add to that?
Sure. My understanding, and I wish Jordan Hess was here to address it, he could say it better than I, but my understanding is that for rezones and items such as that nature, they come to committee only for information only presentation. It goes to full council and that's where action is taken. But for something like this, a contract, I think it does come to committee, is voted on, and then goes on to get onto the council floor. And Dave, maybe you can clarify that better than I, but typically these land use items are information only presentations.
Yes, that's my experience as well. That council first considered the rezoning application. It was on the consent agenda on April 18th. And that's when it was referred to committee. The public hearing was set, et cetera. So it's been open since then. City council held a public hearing on May 9th, and it's open to this day.
On the previous rezoning attempt that failed, this committee did vote on that proposal, is what I recall. What has changed between now and the previous application for a rezone?
Mr. de Grand Prix, I'll let you answer that, but then I'm going to redirect the conversation back to the current item.
Quickly, I don't think that impression is accurate. I believe that in the last rezoning, it wasn't voted on at the committee level. It was voted on at the council level on an evening meeting.
Okay, thank you.
And any further public comment? Okay, seeing no other hands, Mr. Carlino.
Yeah, I support the motion to table this until after the rezone is voted on. You know, every member of council is also a member of this committee, and we always vote about 99% of the time the same at the council meeting as we did at the committee meeting. So it would be really disingenuous to say that voting on this today wouldn't be to vote on this before the rezone. If we vote today on the development agreement, that's voting on the development agreement before the rezone happens. And we've been cautioned against that. And I think it really makes a lot more sense to vote on the zoning based off of the merits and what state law and staff says to vote on it based off of, and then vote on the development agreement afterwards. To say that voting on it today isn't the same as it just isn't genuine, just not honest to say that voting on this today and then voting on it afterwards at the end of the meeting after we vote on the rezone would be to vote on it afterwards. Because if we vote on it today, we're voting on the development agreement first, is all I'm saying. So we need to table it.
Just point of clarification, you keep saying table, but tabling is not what the motion is for. Tabling would be doing something different. So holding it would be more appropriate. Ms. Vasika.
Thanks. I respectfully am not going to be in support of the motion and to hold it in committee because we've already spent a lot of time discussing this. So whatever your vote is going to be for the rezone, whether it be in favor or not in favor of it, this just gets it on the floor instead of doing it again in the future. Talk about this next week. So yeah, I'm just not going to be in favor of this, respectfully.
Right, thank you. Ms. Becerra.
I'm not trying to muddy the waters more, but one thought that I had is that we could potentially amend the motion that's recommended for today, but add a sentence that says pending rezone vote, or depending on approval of the rezone. So that way you still vote on it after the rezone, but right after, and you don't have to keep it in committee. I don't even know if that's a possibility, but I just thought of a way to address the concerns that I already have, primarily because all this discussion that we're having today, if it's going to result in another version of the development agreement, I think it's important that council members read it and be prepared to vote on it, and that the public has a chance to view it before Monday night. So regardless of what happens, I would like for us to be able to have the final version of this development agreement before we vote on it. But to go back to my previous suggestion, I'm wondering if that is, it would be an amendment to the recommended motion that we have before us today, or that we are supposed to take action on today. And it would be to add language that makes it clear that that it would be dependent on a positive outcome of the rezone. Does that make sense? I'm looking at Dave DeGrom, just.
Yes, but I think that goes without saying, because if the rezoning is not approved on Monday night, the way the order would be set up, the rezoning would be voted on Monday night first. If the rezoning is not approved, then there's no further action to take on the development agreement. If the rezoning is approved, you could vote on it on Monday night, or you could wait until there is a more final version with some of the elements that we've discussed today, living with wildlife or bear smart, bear aware type language, and that there's a clean version with parks comments that have been inserted in the agreement if approved by the developer as well. So So this development agreement would not have to be voted on Monday night either way, whether the zoning is approved or not. But if the zoning is approved on Monday night, then council could give staff direction, perhaps to further negotiate or discuss things with the developer, or you could, take whatever action you deem appropriate at that time.
Right, one clarification, we do have the motion on the floor regarding holding this open, so we have to address that before we can do anything else. Ms. Cheryl.
Yeah, thanks. And I want to first say that I appreciate Kristen's concern around this, and that, this has been, some of this is kind of hard to keep separate, but I also do believe that the reason to keep something in committee is because we are vetting it further. So, I mean, if there is a concern around additions or deletions of things that would prompt it to be kept in committee, then that would be different to me. But I think I disagree with someone who said something about it being disingenuous. I disagree with that, because to vote for it now, because it really is voting to send it to the council floor. So yes, we can stop things at the committee level, but the real vote of whether that we are going to, as a city, get into this contractual agreement is made on Monday nights. So, and there have been people that changed their mind on Monday nights. Some people voted just to get it to the council floor. So I don't think that that's necessarily true. The other thing is, I think naturally by how our agenda runs, if it's on committee reports, we're going to get to it in our agenda, the progression of our agenda on a Monday night. We're going to get to it after we voted on the rezone anyway. So I don't know what the process is to say now we're not voting on this, but so while I appreciate the thought behind it, I'm not going to be supporting keeping it in committee, because I think the only reason to do that would be if we had information that we were seeking.
Mr. DeGramper, you still have your hand up. Is there something you wanted to address?
No, sorry.
Ms. West.
So, oh, my calendar went away. I was trying to look at dates. So I'm not going to support this motion. I was just looking at the calendar. If we send it back to committee, we'd hopefully see it the 29th, but then the 4th obviously is a holiday to get it back to main council meeting. And that would really push this item down quite a few weeks. And I think it's something we need to wrap up. And I do have a question though. Once we dispossess with this motion, is there a way, could we just have a motion to move it to the city council meeting without, just having it be a motion to move it to the full council for final consideration without actually considering the motion that's in front of us?
So essentially, can we move to place it on the council agenda?
Exactly, because
without voting support or not?
Yes, so the vote would just be to get it on the council agenda, because I do also see the logic in our votes today potentially being interpreted as relating to the zoning itself, which I think if we just moved it to the council agenda without a vote on the content, I think that could be cleaner potentially. But I don't agree with holding it open any longer.
Ms. Jones, do you, or can somebody speak to the process on that? Is that an allowable option? And obviously that's a separate motion from this one.
Yep, so I would make a new motion once we get done with this.
I would look to Jim Nugent to see it. That makes sense to me. And Jim, do you have thoughts on that? We have to first deal with the first motion in front of us, of course, but then if there's a motion simply to push this to the council floor.
Yeah, you just send it out without recommendation. You just ask the city clerk to have it out there without recommendation. However, I'd caution about it being final consideration, because if there are any substantive amendments made, the public has to have a reasonable opportunity to comment on any substantive revisions. If there are substantive revisions, you've just about assured that it's going to be delayed, because you have to be sure that the public has reasonable notice and reasonable opportunity to comment on any substantive revision. What Daniel proposed was a substantive revision. So you would need to, if that came up and passed, you would need to allow for an opportunity for the public to comment. A reasonable opportunity is what state law says.
So for clarification, if a motion came from this committee to put the development agreement as presented with the amendments from the Parks Department on the council agenda, that would not be substantive changes. That would just be.
Those revisions are there in time for the agenda. The public has reasonable opportunity to be notified, as well as a reasonable opportunity for public participation. The recommendation should note that it incorporates committee revisions, or however you want to refer to that. But as long as those revisions exist when the agenda goes out, I think you'll be okay about reasonable opportunity for public participation.
Okay, thank you. Ms. West, I'm going to come back to you after we address this motion. Ms. Savage.
Ms. West just handled what I had in mind. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Ms. Jordan.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the comments and the discussion around this. I do have, as I mentioned before, significant concerns about transparency in this particular process. I think it's hard to convince people that perhaps we're making a vote on Monday night that didn't consider this development agreement unless we vote on the rezone first. And so if we can do as Heidi said, I will, which means, if just make sure I understand, is that we would just send it to the city council agenda for Monday night, and then we would vote on it after we vote on the rezone. If that's how it's going to be, I will withdraw my motion.
That is my understanding of what Ms. West suggested. So you are withdrawing your motion. And if for some reason the motion made doesn't line up with what you're thinking, we can revisit it, I suppose.
Thank you.
All right. We are back to council conversation. Ms. West, do you have a new motion for us, perhaps?
I think I'm going to give it a go, incorporating what Mr. Nugent just said. So I think my recommended motion would be that the development agreement as currently amended, so that's with the changes suggested by the Parks Department, be moved to the city council agenda for final consideration. Does that capture everything?
Ms. Becerra, we've got to go to public comment first, but any clarifications on the motion?
Yeah, I guess I would like to know if the conversations and suggestions that were made today then would be passed on with this version of the agreement onto Monday night, meaning living with wildlife, or like, when do we get an answer from the developer as to whether that is possible to do? Because regardless of the rezone, having any sort of development that doesn't include important guidelines like that, I think we need to explore that possibility before Monday night or during Monday night.
My understanding, based on what Mr. Nugent just said, is if we don't have those substantive changes, I don't know if it's now or before the council agenda goes out, we could not have final consideration on Monday because we wouldn't have had enough notice for public process. But Mr. Nugent, do you want to weigh in on that?
think it will be in Dave's hands. If Dave gets the information that people are requesting and can have it ready for the packet by noon. I think the city clerk now wants it noon on Thursday, but in time for it to go out in the packet, then that shouldn't be an issue. But if the developer isn't able to get Dave an answer in time for it to go out on the city council packet, then in essence, the recommendation that would be on the agenda would not include the amendments that have been suggested.
And to follow up on that, if that was the route that this committee wanted to go, would we need to address that in amendment before Ms. West's motion? Or because otherwise it's just kind of a directive, but we never voted on it.
I think the committee can just send it out without recommendation as amended or not as amended, depending what information Dave has when it's time to submit the information to the packet.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor and Mr. Alt has his hand up. So I'm going to promote him to a panelist so that he can speak, and then Mirta and Kristen will come back to both of you. All right, Mr. Alt, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay, hi there, Ken Alt, developer. Martha, I agree. I mean, that's something that we can work with the city on. I mean, if we have a bear problem up there, I think we all want to address a bear problem, for example. I think we're all on the same page there. I don't know what that takes to get that in agreement today if we just solve that, but we would be willing to work with the city on those types of issues for sure.
All right, thank you, Mr. Alt. So I guess point of clarification from Gwen or staff, do we need that in the form of a motion as an amendment to this?
I don't think so. I think there was pretty clear directives from council today for staff to work. I'm sure Dave was keeping a list of the items mentioned, and it's just a question if he and the developer and the developer staff can work on this as quickly as possible. And I'm hoping get it attached to the agenda by Friday afternoon. That would be great. Thursday would be even better, but I think by Friday, that will still be 3 days of notice to everyone. So I think that's where we're at procedurally.
And for clarification, the only additional thing besides the amendments from the Parks Department that we're discussing is the bear aware information.
I think there was one more thing that came up, which was the bus stop, and whether or not Hellgate and Mountain Line had provided input.
Okay, Ms. West, would you mind withdrawing your motion for a moment?
Sure, I'll withdraw my motion.
Thank you. So the bus stop. What's the direction for the staff on the bus stop?
My question was whether coordination had happened, and if it hadn't, can that happen in order to make sure that the shelter does what it's intended to do? And maybe they, the developer has already coordinated and knows where to place the shelter so that it provides that it's in coordination with beach transportation or Hellgate transportation and Missoula County Public Schools transportation.
Okay, Mr. McCormick with the developers group has his hand up, so I'm going to call on him, and then Ms. Jordan will come to you.
Thanks, Mr. Nugent. I can't speak to the bus shelter, but so that we're creating a clear record of direction. Mirta had raised issues that were a little broader than just the bear issue. She'd raised the issue about the living with wildlife language. I've created several sets of covenants recently that build the county's version of that language into it, so I'm familiar with it. And so I just wanted to make sure that we had clarification whether it was the broader set or just the bare provisions or what, so that we have clear direction on what we're looking at doing there.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, please.
I think my intent was that we know we have, and Alan, I know that you have used that language that's pretty standard, updated frequently or not frequently, but there is language already about living with wildlife that's used for covenants. And I think it would be great to have those included or available to the developers so that it meets that goal. In terms of the bear aware or living with bears, or I'm not sure that we have that information. If we have it, it would be great to also have it included. But if we don't have it, at such time when it becomes available, I would like for that to be something that this development incorporates into the design. I know that dumpsters and trash and all of that is part of that effort that's underway. And especially, I know that, we discussed that many other apartment complexes don't have to adhere to these covenants or don't have covenants. But right where the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, it's been bear habitat in the past. So it is, I think, would be in the best interest of the future residents to have these guidelines to guide that development. So if the bear language is not available at such time when it becomes available, it would be great to have it incorporated.
All right, thank you, Mirta. There are two hands up in the audience. One is Cody Swartz from Worth Engineering, and the other is Spencer Woith. I assume that they are on the development team. So I'm going to promote them because I think they might have something to add to this particular part of the conversation. So Cody, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I just wanted to address Mirtha's comments about the bus shelter real quick. We did have preliminary conversations with the school district back in the day. There are two stops currently in the neighborhood, are Expo Parkway and Grant Creek Road, and then Stonebridge Road and Grant Creek Road. So our thought was to put that bus shelter along a public right of way as close as we could get to those. So that was why that spot was selected in that lower corner of our property.
All right, thank you. Ms. Jordan.
Thank you. A couple thoughts. One is it does feel like we need to have more of a discussion about the development agreement in general. I also think that us not voting on it today or Monday night isn't going to affect the timeline of this project overall. And I still would like to maybe keep it in committee so that we can really hash out these ideas that we're trying to really find solutions for in the 11th hour unnecessarily, because it really isn't supposed to be contingent on the rezone vote. It's not going to affect the timeline of the development as far as getting things going. And we still have a lot of questions, I think, and things to sort out that would merit tabling this and keeping it in committee until we can really have a good conversation about it. I think you said, Heidi, it might be the 29th or something. It would be the next time we could do it. I can't remember the date, but there's just a lot of questions. We're trying to cram things in. It's not going to affect the start date of this project. And it would also tick the box that we didn't vote on this before the rezone. So I just would like to put it out there. What if we just table it? And I'm sure I'm using the wrong words again. Keep it in committee. Sorry.
So we had a motion on that front. We took public comment. We got comments from council. That motion was withdrawn. Right now, we have no active motion on the floor. I'm seeing nobody else jump in. Ms. Jones.
I actually would like to get this moving, so I would like to make a motion that we vote to get this on the council floor without an up or down vote, just a neutral vote to get it onto the council floor. It'll be placed on committee reports, and we will address the rezone first, and then this second. I think we've given staff a lot of direction, and they've got a short time frame to work it out, but it's pretty, in my mind, it's pretty finite issues, and I think they can handle it. So I just want to get this moving because it's taken a long time to get the rezone, much less the development agreement pulled forward. And given that we've got a holiday early in July, it's going to really kick it out. So I'd like to make that motion.
All right, that motion is in order. So by our rules, we will go to public comment. I'm going to promote Peggy Walker and RT Cox and Grant Parker, and I will call on the first one who is promoted, and we'll go from there. All right, Mr. Parker, you should be able to unmute yourself.
If this committee is considering sending it to the city council, one element that you might want to consider, in addition to process considerations, the city has not reached out to neighbors to ask for input on the development agreement, and I think that would be a good thing to do if the city is going to adopt these questionable processes. But as some of the written submittals have saying, the legalities of these development agreements is not at all clear, and I'm sure RT Cox will be talking about that. But my question is, if you're going to redo the development agreement and it is proposed by the developer as an inducement to get the rezone, why not have the developer indemnify and agree to defend the city for any litigation related to the development agreement, so that the decision to use this scheme to try to get the rezone approved wouldn't put the Missoula taxpayers at risk.
All right, thank you for your comment. We're going to go on to Mr. Cox.
Am I here?
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I'm going to be very brief here. I sent a letter quite recently to the council. I'm sure we're all thrilled to get yet another letter from me. Kind of feeling like that guy on the TV ads that say, hey, guess what? It's me again. And I mean no respect to anybody on the city council, but you've all been wrestling this evening with an unprecedented and difficult decision. And that is, how do we deal with a document that is being invented as you go along, revised as you go along, that isn't provided for under Title 20, that isn't normally part of a rezoning process and may not even be legally part of a rezoning process? You may choose to rely on the opinion of your attorney, who's a distinguished and experienced attorney, and you may think it is legal. You're running a risk there. But more importantly, you have established provisions and procedures for reviewing subdivision plats. And all of these things that are so muddy that you're talking about tonight are defined in those subdivision regulations. That's the purpose of having subdivision regulations, so you don't have to make up a new set of rules every time a developer comes to you. So I'm going to quit talking about that topic. I do want to talk about notice. I've sent several requests to development services for documents and gotten no response, including the opinion from Mr. Nugent's office that was dated June 8th. I got it from a neighbor day before yesterday. I'd like for the office to do a little better job of reaching out, and that would include the presidents of the homeowners associations here, whose property joins Mr. Alt's property. And finally, rather than me go on and on, I would like to have a brief opportunity to comment at the city council meeting next week, after a final version of this ad hoc document has been submitted to the council. And again, I mean no disrespect. I think that you've all been put in a weird situation here because this isn't an annexation and it's not a subdivision. It's not being divided for sale to people. The whole thing will be one giant rental project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Ms. Burke.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Will we have another opportunity to comment in general, or is this our last chance to comment? We're commenting on a motion, is that correct?
You're commenting on a motion to put it on the council agenda. So your next opportunity to comment would be if the motion passes at the council meeting.
So there won't be any further discussion on the development agreement if we don't get our words in right now until council hearing,
Yes, that'd be the next.
if it passes.
Yes.
Okay, so what I wanted to say first was that if the development agreement is continuing to be discussed after the rezoning is voted on, if the rezoning were to pass, what is the incentive for KJA and his associates to make any further concessions at all once they've been given the rezoning they're asking for? I would say that the amendments that we have today are probably the ones we're going to be looking at. There won't be any further opportunities to get more concessions.
All right, thank you for your comments. Ms. Walker.
Hi, my name is Peggy Walker and I'm a resident of Grant Creek. I'd like to add my support to Kim's remarks about the incentives to the developer to consult with neighbors or add to or improve any items in the development agreement once and if the rezoning is approved. I guess the main thing I want to say is that I have listened to every second of this meeting and have been impressed by the attention and the thoughtfulness of the council in as they consider the issues. But bottom line, I guess I just want to remind both this body and ultimately the council that will vote on the rezone is that the main issue is not whether or not the swimming pool in the development will meet particular standards. Our issue is about density and the safety issues to persons and property of the residents of Grant Creek, and what another potentially 500 more residents on top of the existing zoning could do to us. Just as a very brief example, try to bring this down to day-to-day experience and concerns of the people in the neighborhood. I typically travel down and up Grant Creek Road at least once a day. And today I had a typical experience. Traffic coming out of Expo Parkway and other streets nearing the entrance to Reserve Street and I-90, with only 105 roughly apartments now built and occupied there. I feel like I'm taking my life into my hands every time I drive down that road. Now multiply this by 7. Today, I nearly was hit by somebody racing out of that intersection. And not only are people careless about doing that, but there is more and more and more traffic at an already risky intersection. So I think it's wonderful that we're talking about Bear Aware programs. I would like to see that addressed for every apartment complex in the city. But I don't want us to get off the main point here, which is that we as the residents of Grant Creek have not opposed the existing zoning, even though that in and of itself poses substantial risks. What we oppose is the additional and severe dangers posed by this level of density in that location. And I would ask that you keep that in mind. That's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We have one more public comment from Cameron. If you could unmute yourself and state your name for the record.
Yes, Cameron Shortell, Grant Creek. Martha brought up some points there with the public-private, with the wildlife, and of course, bears always ring the bell there. And Gwen had also brought up the point that we have professionals around that have dealt with this, and then we think that we'll be able to take care of this, because it isn't uncommon to see these things brought before the table. I mean, we just saw it in the rattlesnake, right? Just recently, they were having to bear deterrent garbage cans. And I'm glad she brought these things up. And again, as long as these things we know are going to get addressed, I think that makes people, the public, feel good that these things are being concerned. They are being addressed. But then again, we were talking about next week, will these things be in writing? Will these things be before? Because, once we go forward with something like this, I guess I'm just a firm believer of nipping things in the bud before they get out of control. Hit the problem before it becomes a problem, right? So the public-private thing, I see the dog park thing, and I just, from what I've seen around town, it's this area is a little different. It's across from a bunch of hotels. Will that become the hotel's dog park also? Not that that's a bad thing or anything, but do we know? Yes or no? I don't know. So there's just some questions there that she had brought up that I guess I hadn't thought of, and I'm glad she brought those up. And I just hope those are seriously put into consideration before we meet next week. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. All right. Mr. Voigt.
Yeah, I just have a quick question for Dave. If we go through this process and we get the comments, some of the ones that Myrta had and some others, and we want to get that language back to you, we're committed to getting this turned around as quickly as possible. When does your office need those?
I'm not exactly sure what the city clerk's office requires, but ideally we'd have it nailed down tomorrow and posted.
Okay, I think we'll go through it. We're committed to working on it this afternoon. So we'll start working on it and we'll get it to you as soon as we can.
All right, thank you. We have a motion on the floor. We've taken public comment. Any further questions from council? Seeing none, I would ask the staff to do a roll call vote on the motion on the floor.
I wanted to ask.
One quick thing. Myrta, did you have?
I just wanted clarification on what the motion is that we're voting on now.
The motion on the floor right now is to move the development agreement as discussed today with the recommended changes in regards to the items you addressed to council to be voted on at council. So with no recommendation.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Questions, comments? Seeing none, staff, if you want to do a roll call vote.
Sure, and thank you, Martha. That was my question too. And who made that motion?
Ms. Jones.
Thank you. Martha Becerra?
Yes.
Daniel Carlino?
No.
John Contos,
Yes.
Gwen Jones,
Yes.
Kristen Jordan,
Yes.
Mike Nugent,
No.
Jennifer Savage,
Yes.
Amber Sherrill,
Yes.
Sandra Basica,
Yes.
and Heidi West.
Yes.
There's 2 yeses and 8 nos.
Great, thank you. Motion carries. We have no further agenda items.
I think that was
Hang on.
switched.
It was 8 yeses.
It's
and
8
2 nos.
yeses and 2 nos. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, motion carried. All right, that's our last agenda item. So we will be adjourned and we have our next committee in 14 minutes. Mirta, you have your hand up?
I just wanted to make sure, is this gonna be on committee reports then, so that we can bring it up and discuss? Okay,
Yes.
thanks.
All right, thanks, everybody.